You mentioned students. In 1989, in November 1989, I was a young diplomat and I followed the events that unfolded in Berlin. Two friends of mine and I went to Berlin by car, and we witnessed the end of the division of Europe. So we celebrated. It was wonderful. It was the first opportunity we got to speak to people from East Berlin. They looked different. They were wearing leather jackets, but not made from real leather. They had very interesting haircuts. They had special trainers or shoes. But we shared beer, we shared cigarettes, and we shared in the freedom of Europe. And next month, my son will be turning 26. He was born at that time. So I really think about these times a lot. And when I take my children to Berlin, well, I have to say it's very difficult to even recognize Berlin, and it's not been that long. So we as Europeans, we are quite good at adapting to history, and sometimes we lose sight of history. That's not a good thing. We need to teach our children about the past, and we need to keep telling these stories. The incoming European Commission is faced with unprecedented challenges. The European Union has undergone the worst economic crisis in its existence, and there is a lot of alienation from the people. There's a lot of disenchantment with the European Union. The public is becoming more Eurosceptical, and there are some movements, public movements, that are even hostile to Europe. And we need to find an answer to that if we want to continue our journey to make Europe strong. I think that the European Commission has lived up to this challenge from its first day in office, and it is committed to resolving all these challenges. This is a European Commission that is more accountable to the people than any before. It has also given itself a new structure which is more streamlined, more efficient. On the basis of the political guidelines set out by Mr. Juncker, this Commission has committed to restoring the trust of the European people. And this means a turnaround for the European Commission. We need to focus on the central line, on what the people really care about. And this means that the European Union should only act in fields where it must act, and not wherever it might be desirable that the European Union should get involved. First of all, better legislation and interinstitutional cooperation. This is part of my portfolio, and it's part of my job to make this work. So this new approach has already led to a new work program for 2015. Based on the political guidelines and the 10 priorities set out in these guidelines, the work program identifies a limited number of 23 new initiatives on which the European Union should focus, the European Commission should focus over the years to come. So the first of these initiatives have already been presented to the public, mainly the investment package, which was unveiled in November. A maximum of 315 billion euros over 3 years for new investment. When it comes to implementing this plan, the Commission published its proposal for a new European Fund for Strategic Investment, the ESFI. This fund will be equipped with a dedicated committee which composed of independent experts not affiliated to any political parties. They will look into the projects and approve them. The European Commission has also looked into coordination, which is extremely important for economic coordination within the European semester. This coordination has to happen in better partnership and enhanced partnership with the member states. At the same time, the European Commission has also published guidelines as to how the European Pact for Growth and Stability can be rendered more flexible without changing any of the provisions of the pact. The guidelines make it clear how the provisions should be interpreted and how they should be reconciled with investment. At the same time, reform is also indispensable. Investment, structural reform, and responsible financing and spending. All this has to go hand in hand. It can't be dealt with in an isolated way. Another important priority for the European Commission is to make Europe more transparent. Within 1 month of taking office, that is in November last year, the European Union Commission decided to enhance transparency. All meetings between members of the European Commission and high officials and private sector companies will be made public or announced, and the public will be able to know who these stakeholders represent and what their interests are. At the same time, the Council and the Parliament also need to face up to these new calls for transparency. This is why I will be tabling a proposal for an interinstitutional agreement on a new binding transparency register. Another major priority for the European Commission and for me personally is cutting red tape and ensuring better legislation. Competitiveness of our industry is extremely important to me. Too often I have to see that small and medium-sized enterprises do no longer see the single market as an opportunity, but as a source of regulatory burden. So it's a challenge for the institutions to make sure that the European Union will only get involved if the benefit of this involvement is higher than the cost. Regulation must also be clear and efficient, and it must not be, and the burden it creates must not be unjustified. At the same time, we need to maintain our standards in terms of labor law, environmental law, and so forth. It's about achieving this goal in a transparent and intelligent way. Next spring, I will be tabling new proposals as to how this could be achieved. We will also have a new system for the impact assessment of our measures. We want our impact assessment system to be the best in the world, and we want to strengthen our rules. The new body overseeing this will be composed of full-time experts, and it will also have external experts. I also seek to make further improvements to the public hearings on legal matters. We need to look at the issue of better legislation, not only as far as new proposals are concerned. We also need to review existing union law. We need to look at where we can streamline things and where there's potential for improvement. Within this year, I want to table a new package that will help to reduce red tape. At the same time, we must not forget that better legislation cannot be achieved by the Commission alone. It's a task that needs to be tackled by every institution involved in the legislative process, that is also the Parliament and the Council. So, whenever the Council or the Parliament make any changes to proposed legislation, they also need to make sure that there is an impact assessment made. This is why this spring I will be presenting to the Parliament and to the Council a new proposal for an agreement for better legislation. This should help us to create streamlined, better legislation and to make sure that there's less friction between the institutions. This brings me to another topic which is also extremely important for growth and employment, something that is viewed in a rather negative light in Germany. What I mean is TTIP. We need a balanced investment partnership with the US. We're convinced that reducing barriers to trade in our transatlantic relations is of essence. TTIP is particularly beneficial for an export-driven nation like Germany. The opportunities outweigh the risks. But at the same time, we also need to look at people's fears, and many of them are based on misunderstandings. The new Commission has committed itself to publishing many of the documents and also to making the negotiations more flexible. TTIP is not about lowering environmental or social standards. Right-wing parties use, excuse me, interpreter correct. As far as ISDS is concerned, this is something that has not always been discussed as in the way it should have been. This is not about protecting any investment. It's about protecting investments that have been made. And it's not anything new. It's something that can be found in many bilateral agreements that Germany too has signed and which have much lower standards as the one we are aiming for. The European Commission has launched or has carried out and assessed a major public consultation. We will be using this input to further improve the ISDS chapters as far as, for instance, an appeals body is concerned. ISDS and TTIP will only become a reality if all the requirements made in the mandate by the European Commission are met. And I personally will make sure that this is the case. We don't want TTIP at any cost. What we want is a balanced TTIP. This is the kind of agreement that is worth working for and striving towards. And this is why I would like to ask you for your support in the public debate. Before I close, I would like to speak about something else that may not look like it has anything to do with growth, but is still very important: internal security and combating terrorism. If we look at the events of Paris and Copenhagen, we see what kind of challenges our societies are faced with. I'm proud of the way in which people in Paris and Copenhagen reacted to the attacks. They did so with dignity and with great restraint. And I think this should also be what should be guiding us at political level. We don't need knee-jerk reactions. We need to look at what is necessary. Public security is something that the member states are mainly responsible for, but the European Union can help coordinate cooperation between the member states. This is not necessarily about new legislation. It's about implementing and transposing existing legislation. One measure that I am convinced will make a substantial contribution to tackling international terrorism is PNR. The German word for this is very confusing. Fluggastdatenspeicherung, very long. Anyway, so I don't think it's in the interest of member states or of the single market for member states to have their own rules in place when it comes to storing data of people boarding flights in Europe. So I very much welcome the fact that the work on a joint system has continued. The reform package on data privacy is another area. We need to make sure that we can combat crime and tackle crime in an effective way, but that we also respect people's privacy. At the end of the day, security is not only a basic right, it's also the basis on which our prosperity is founded. So this is one more very important priority for the Commission. And the Parliament and the Commission and the Council have prepared an agenda, will be preparing an agenda for security. But tolerance and openness are just as important. Anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance are a symptom of the crisis which we still haven't left behind us. This is not a purely economic crisis. It's also a political and maybe even moral crisis. A society in which people don't feel safe because of the color of their skin or because of their faith is a society where the economy can't thrive either. And what is much more important, it's not a European society. Anti-Semitism and intolerance will not make Europe. So we need to be very intolerant when it comes to intolerance. So there are major challenges, there are major crises, and what's happening in the world seems very threatening. But at the same time, we also want to accept these challenges, and I call upon you to do the same. Let's work together to bring Europe back to the path of stability, and we need to work against this mistrust between European civilizations, between European countries, and also this dystopia. There's much reason to be confident and optimistic, and we should not forget about this. Thank you.